violence, because if a child gets smacked a lot, then it could lead them to use violence in the street and things like that.
Good evening. Confession time. Have you ever smacked your children? And if so, do you or did you at the time feel guilty about it? Now, I'm not talking about beating children, just the odd slap perhaps when they've been really naughty and won't stop whatever it is they're doing. Sounds innocent enough, perhaps, but in some countries it's against the law, and it looks as though we're moving in that direction here in Britain. In Sweden, it's been illegal to smack children for 11 years now. Our special guest tonight is Adrienne Heuser, Professor of Social Welfare at the University of Wisconsin. She spent a lot of time in Sweden carrying out research into the effect of the anti-smacking law. Maggie Philbin has done some research of her own here in Britain. She's been talking to different families about smacking. Those who do, those who don't, and those who do but wish they didn't.
I change his nappy every week.
Children never fail to be captivated by the magic of Punch and Judy, even though there's a fair amount of domestic violence.
Oh, yes, you are. Now, you watch, Mr. Punch. If he's naughty with my baby, will you call me?
Punch seems to have a modern parent's dilemma. Should he be smacking his child? After all, it's been banned in schools, and there's a growing lobby to make it illegal in the home as well. Because it's only your own children you can smack without fear of reprisal.
Lee, not quite so loud.
Like her fellow teachers, Frances Burton would never dream of hitting one of the children in her class, but she does believe that parents have the right to do so.
I think it's a very, very hard and underestimated job bringing up small children. And I think people need encouragement, not criticism. I have smacked my children, but very, very rarely, because I think the most important thing is to get a good sense of discipline, along with fun, from the start. I found with my own children, when they were small, that they learned very quickly that if they were told no for something, they were given a reason, and they quickly accepted that once that was no, then Mum didn't change her mind. I think that some children will push you to the very, very limits, and I think that they need to know that everybody has their own limits.
I think smacking is violence, because if a child gets smacked a lot, then it could lead them to use violence in the street and things like that.
Why do you agree with smacking?
Because if you're sent to your room, you've got a lot of books and toys to play with. It doesn't solve anything being sent to your room. Smacks are better.
I don't think that smacking is right, because children want revenge after you've been smacked, but they do need a bit of discipline.
So is that how you feel like if you get smacked?
Yeah, I want revenge.
I think smacking's better than telling off, because telling off, you get all choked up inside.
Do you think you need to be smacked?
Sometimes when I do really naughty things.
What do you think is really naughty?
When I smashed a leg over my mum's head.
There are many children who will feel very envious of Sam and Ben Roscombe because their parents no longer believe in smacking.
A smack is a quick fix. It might tell the child to stop, but it doesn't tell the child why to stop. It's very difficult, I think, for children to respect their parents if they know they're being smacked, possibly even for the wrong things. Children grow up equating love and affection and protection with hitting, and this then is manifest in how they treat each other. A child certainly should be punished. I mean, they must be allowed to know that things are and aren't okay. There are three ways of smacking. There's a smack which is designed to produce a different kind of behaviour. There's a smack which is for punishment, and there is a smack which is the self-indulgence, and that's the worst, and that's the one I have done when they were smaller, and I must say, I apologised to them afterwards. I felt dreadful. I was very tired, I was under a lot of pressure, and there's absolutely no excuse at all to do that. I think parents who smack are harming themselves as well as their children. I try and relate what I punish them with. You know, if they're behaving really stupidly, then I'll say, look, how can I expect to take you to such and such a place if this is how you show me you behave? So I try and connect the things so that they learn that if they want to go into an adult situation for whatever reasons, that they've got to be a bit more responsible.
The left hand should be a bit more legato.
What, here?
Tish and her husband Luke believe that time spent encouraging and explaining things to their children has been a good investment.
I'm very pleased with them as people. They're very easy. I've never had a social situation where they've let me down in any way or they've let themselves down in any way.
Even more! It's all very well saying that you should reason with your children, but children don't always respond to reason. So what do you do with your child when he's being particularly difficult and you don't believe in smacking? Meet James.
He's always been very strong-willed, and he's always had a clear idea of what he wanted to do. The tantrums with him started sort of at 9 or 10 months, and they've just sort of progressed as we reach the terrible 2s and beyond. Now he's 2.5.
Any parent knows the ridiculous amount of power a 2-year-old can wield. James Edwards has already been banned from his music class for being disruptive, and more trouble lies in store because of his current obsession with trains.
If we go to playgroup and he's playing with the train set there, it's terrible when we have to come home, even with sort of bribes over leaving. If anybody else touches the trains that he's got or touches the track, that sort of produces instant shrieking, jumping up and down, waving his arms. And everybody knows at playgroup that it's James who's screaming because he's particularly loud about it.
If James is always so difficult, why doesn't she smack him?
I just didn't want to hurt him. It just seemed so awful to smack him. Not only that, but I mean, once you smack him and he doesn't do what you said, what do? You have to smack him again, probably harder. And the next day, if he doesn't do what you say, you then have to smack him once or twice or 3 times. It doesn't sort of stop there.
Once Charlotte was born, juggling with James's tantrums became even more difficult. Sarah's determination not to smack was put to the test when James learnt to pick the fridge lock and discovered the delight of smashing eggs, a habit that proved hard to break.
I used to earnestly take him into the sitting room and read him a story or something. And as soon as it was lunchtime, he'd get back in the kitchen, he'd be at the fridge again with the eggs. And it got to the stage where I just didn't buy any more eggs because it was just a waste of time. You know, I'm very patient, but I mean, he drives me to distraction some days when he won't cooperate at all and you've got to go somewhere. Now, I have smacked him on 3 occasions and he had absolutely no effect whatsoever. And when we next went out and he was naughty, I can't remember what it was now, I said to him, "Come on, James, you must be a good boy." And he said, "Don't hit me, Mummy, don't hit me," very piteously, so that, you know, everybody looked at me and I felt, oh, child beater, you know.
To be perfectly frank, I found smacking James hurts me more than it hurts him. It's an old cliche, I know, but it's true. And honestly, in his life, I think I've only smacked him twice.
In a toy shop recently, we were having a tantrum over having another train set. He desperately wants another train set, and he's got one. And he was screaming and kicking and shouting and laying down on the floor. It was just getting dark. We were out fairly late. My baby wasn't terribly well. And it got to the stage where I thought, well, what do you do? I mean, it was just about to rain. I couldn't take my baby outside in sort of that sort of weather. And I thought, well, I just have to sort of weather it out and just put up with all these people looking at me thinking, oh, that child obviously needs a smack or whatever.
I want those. Charlotte can't have one.
Oh, that's not very kind. Poor Charlotte.
What a handful. Yet, many childcare experts also agree that smacking is wrong, despite the fact that parents have always done it and that there are as many parents smacking their children today as ever there were. Maybe the difference is that they now feel guilty about it. But there are others who are convinced that this whole idea of not smacking is mere fashionable nonsense. Lynette Burrows has 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls.
Matthew, why are you trying to eat out of the saucer, darling? The ridiculous thing is that somebody has picked upon this as being a bad aspect of childcare, when it's as much an aspect of childcare as kissing and cuddling your children. It's tremendously important for it to be moderate, which in the overwhelming number of cases it is moderate. And it's tremendously important that parents are not apologetic about it, because children pick that up and feel instantly at an advantage and their parents at a disadvantage, and that's fatal for all authority.
In fact, Lynette thinks it's silly that she has to defend herself for smacking her children. She believes that we'll look back on the idea of not smacking as a mere fad of the 1990s. And she feels so strongly about the need for common sense in parenting that she's written a book in which she explains why even very small children need to be smacked.
It starts as soon as they're old enough to get into trouble, because if a child, like 3 of mine, walked when they were 10 months, so they were all over the place, and it was a question of when they could reach up to pull the teapot off the table, which would scald them. It's just a quick smack on the hand. Don't do that. You don't have to shout. They don't cry. They're learning by a physical effect, and it is effective. And if they then went on to it, you'd have to do it a bit harder. But there is a point at which they will stop. You've only got to look at a badly behaved child. It's usually a bad-tempered child. Whereas when a child knows that he isn't allowed to quarrel and constantly say, I want, it settles down to being cooperative and nice, and they're much happier. Same as children prefer strict teachers that make them produce their best work. It's just the same. We're there to help children, and that means to help them produce their best.
Lynette's children feel that smacking was an important part of family discipline and regard it as a healthy and natural part of growing up. There's now a new generation to discipline because Emma, the eldest daughter, has married. You are now a mother, little Mary Lou there, is making her feelings felt. Will you smack her?
I mean, I wouldn't just sort of go up and slap her for something she did wrong. I would sort of say, well, you know, don't do that. And if she proceeded to be cheeky, which, you know, or proceeded to do it, I think I would smack her.
Riffin, now 17, has a vivid memory of one incident when he was 11.
Well, we did a comprehension at my junior school on shoplifting, and me and 2 other boys thought it'd be a good crack to go and try it out, you know, inspired by this thing. So we went out to town and did some shoplifting, and then we did some more. It was good fun, actually. It was all exciting and everything. And then we got caught.
One of the other children's parents had phoned me up and said, "This is dreadful." We were terribly shocked, obviously, and we sort of sat down with him, tears all round. I mean, he boo-hoo-hooed all over the place. How could you? It never occurred to me at that time to smack him, because my mother always used to say, you smack children for things that don't matter. For the things that do, you've got to talk and find out what's going on.
My mum lectured me for hours. But see, it was so long, it was just like, it got boring after 30 seconds. And I ended up thinking, well, what can I go and do this afternoon?
Then a month later, blow me, I found he'd done exactly the same again with the same group of boys. So I thought, right, that's it. And so at that time, my husband gave him 4 or 5 good whacks. Now, that was the end of that.
I thought it was severe at the time, 6 are the best thing. And no, I didn't do it again after that because, you know, that hurt.
Lynette believes that it was the smack that made Riffin see sense and stopped him getting into deeper trouble.
Thank you. Okay, then. A child's capacity for wreaking havoc increases with its size. But as far as a whack and personal pain, he said that was the end of it. And he said, I knew I would never take anything again.
Well, all very well, Professor Heuser, but the parents would have been breaking the law in many countries.
Well, certainly they would in Sweden, which passed a law in '79 that prohibits all physical punishment of children. And now, similar laws also in Finland, Denmark, Norway, and Austria. And Germany is considering such a law, just as you are here in Britain.
And you think that's right?
Well, I think it's right. In the case that we just saw of Riffin, probably what would have happened in Sweden is a different kind of punishment. people and parents in all of these countries think that children need discipline, but they just feel that it should not be a physical kind of penalty. And probably in Sweden, the parent would have done what I did when my son, who was then 12, and I'd like to say, by the way, that I am a new grandmother and have 4 children. My claim to fame is that I had 4 children in 4 years, 3 boys. And when one of my boys, at probably the age of 12, took a candy bar from a store, I talked to the proprietor and said, what can my son do around here for 2 weeks? And in fact, for the next 2 weeks, instead of going out to play after school, he went and cleaned the parking lot at the store.
So, Mrs. Roscombs, what do you think about that? Wouldn't it have made better sense for you to have done exactly that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I really can't see there's any relevance to looking at other countries. I think it was the minister, David Mellon, that said if we'd followed Sweden in the last war, we'd all be living under Nazism now. I mean, the Swedes are a different people from us. They haven't had a war for 150 years. They're highly biddable, pacifistic people. You might as well say arranged marriages work for Indians, therefore we ought to import it here. We are talking about our culture, our traditions, something tried and tested over generations, largely by women. I not only think it's an insult to our culture, but an insult to women to suppose they're so stupid they need legislation to tell them how to bring up their own children.
Well, Mrs. Burrows instead, I called you Mrs. Roscombs, apologies. Mrs. Burrows, yeah.
Am I allowed to
Go on, yes,
interject
Mrs.
there?
Roscombs.
That is just such an insult to our capacity as human beings who are still evolving. We are not cavemen anymore.
Well, you may feel you're evolving. I don't feel I'm evolving. I feel I'm an adult, mature woman, perfectly capable of deciding what I want to do with my children as you are for yours. I wouldn't dream of imposing it on you.
We do not own our children. They own themselves. We have a duty to them. We do not have a right to them. They are entitled to be brought up safely. It's nothing to do with what you're talking about. It's just purely educating their aggressive instincts that they are born with. Those instincts can't be ignored. They won't go away. You can see in this little boy. You can channel them into education. You can channel them into sports. What you cannot do is say, don't be aggressive. Here, have a smack.
Now, Mrs. Burrows, you were saying in this little boy. Which little boy did you have in mind?
I was talking about
James.
wee James there, yes, who is a child with a strong character. I feel infinite sympathy for him. It's an awful pity, I think. He will obviously go all through his school career in hot water because nobody has said, thus far, no further. End of argument, Sunshine.
Well, Mrs.
He'd be an ideal little boy if that was ever said to him, but you lack the confidence, which I think is an awful pity. You probably also have a full-time nanny, so you don't have to bear the brunt of what he's actually like, because your husband does.
Let's give the Edwards a chance to reply to that. Mrs. Edwards?
No, I don't have a full-time nanny. In fact, I've just gone back to work and I'm working a morning, probably a week, and my mother looks after him.
But what about the points that Mrs. Burrows is making about you actually, in a sense, letting down James?
I have smacked him on 3 occasions when, I mean, I feel very ashamed I smacked him because I lost control to a certain extent. I didn't hit him hard, but it had absolutely no effect. So I don't think you can say that it's a short, sharp shock. And the basis...
That's the wrong way round to hit him when you've lost control. He shouldn't be able to drive you like that. You are an adult. You're entitled to certain freedom and pleasure in living. I've never lost control with my children. And I think it's interesting that American research, Diane Beaumrind, which was a very large thing, showed that it was parents like yourselves who never used any physical force against their children, who, when questioned, said they felt most likely to damage their children in a temper. Because they
when I say I lost control, I don't mean I battered him. I gave him one smack on the hand.
All right. Yeah. Professor, what is the alternative? There's a clear case here from Mrs. Burrows that James should have the odd whack. His mother has done it, feels guilty, and won't do it again?
No.
Well, I think we want
Now, what is the but then what do we do about James? Because by everybody's admission, he's a little terror. What do you do?
Well, I think we want to be careful about labeling James. I think James may just be having a good case of the terrible twos.
Yes. I never had any terrible twos.
If I may finish.
All right, yes, go on, go on. We'll come back to you in a minute, Mrs. Burrows. Yeah.
And certainly, we know, not only from our own experience, but from the research as well, that some children are simply more difficult to bring up than others.
So what do you do about them?
And so what you do is you, if necessary, seek some professional help and have a lot of patience and know that this too will pass.
All right, professional...
And you take alternatives.
Professional help. What do you mean by professional help?
child psychologist, child development expert,
How very
psychiatrist,
American.
or whatever.
James isn't going to require child psychology. We're just going to bring him up as a rational human being.
Exactly.
The claptrap that was talked about not learning from other countries.
And James has rights.
Hang on, one at a time. You said it's claptrap
yes,
to
I mean,
talk about
we
learning
can't
from
learn
other
from
countries.
other countries. I mean, we could learn a lot from other countries. Are we so arrogant as a race that we just think the British have got everything absolutely right?
Well, are you
It
so
seems
arrogant
to
as a
me
person
that-
to suggest that for the last however many hundreds of thousands of years, people have not been able to control their children? Are you so arrogant to assume that James is the first person who's ever had talent?
But let's look at it this way. For the last hundreds of thousands of years, we were going around in caves. We're
You
now...
don't think we've progressed, and you don't think we would have progressed without child psychologists or laws to tell us how to?
You speak as somebody who's been beaten, slapped, hit yourself, smacked yourself. It didn't do you any harm, you say?
It didn't, I mean, did me no harm.
All right.
It did a lot of people.
Can I
All right.
please say something
Yeah,
here?
just quickly, and then I want to go to Peter
Very
Newell. Yeah.
quickly, I feel the issue is not whether... I mean, of course, we should feel we have a, control over our children and so forth. What the law would bring around, which I think is potentially desperately needed in this country, is a re-education programme. And I don't know perhaps whether we need the law. We need the re-education so that we can learn parenting. It is still very new to us. We assume because we're animals, these things come out of us and we know what to do with them. We
Yes,
don't
but you
know
are
what to do with
parenting
them.
for people on the whole who haven't done a lot of it. In the past, people have also been parents of very large
This is why the
families
cycle
in
sets
very
up
difficult
in
conditions.
indeed. We are
Just one at a time. I don't want to hear anybody. Professor, go on.
Having
Then I want to
come
go to
from the
Peter
United
Newell.
States, let me say something. In Sweden, actually, they found that after the law was passed, parents were using more discipline than they had prior to the passing of the law. And of course, they were using a different kind of
Because they knew where they stood, is what
They
you're
knew
saying.
where they stood, and the government had helped educate
needed
them
to use more
about
acting
the
because-
kinds of
because-
alternatives
hang on a sec.
the government had given to every family with a child under 5 a wonderful multi-page, multicolor booklet telling them how to use
live.
alternatives
How
to
to live,
physical
yes.
punishment and to give them resources for further help.
What if they
Right.
were French?
And I'd
Now-
like to add about Sweden with respect to the transferability from one country to another,
Yes.
that indeed it seems to me that Sweden's history of pacifism is rather admirable.
Not
And
really, not when it
something
means supporting
that
the
we
Nazis
might
until
all want to
1943.
look at carefully, and
Now-
that when you physically hit a child, no matter how light it is, you are teaching that child that when it can't get its way or when all else fails, physical force is
Now,
acceptable.
Peter Newell, I promised you a word. Yeah. What you want it to be made illegal in Britain as well. Your organisation wants to stop it in
Yes, I
Britain as
think
well.
we should be clear about this. We're not asking for some special law for children. What we're saying is that children should have the same protection that the rest of us already have. We've got to the point now of removing it from schools, removing physical punishment from all other institutions, and we're just at we're right at the door of the family home. I think you have to look at it from the child's perspective. What we're hearing from the other side is really a very old form of parenting. Most parents who contact us
Why is it old news?
don't,
Because
they may still be smacking their children, but they don't like it,
But now they'll be
they don't think it's useful, they don't think it works, they
All right.
want to know how they can avoid doing
Francis
so.
Burton, you've had a huge amount of experience of dealing with children as a teacher and all the rest of it. What's your view about this? What the argument seems to be is that if you introduce a law, then at least parents know where they stand. It's quite clear from then on.
I think all rational parents know where they stand. No parent enjoys smacking their child. I think the parent gets as much hurt out of it as the child does. But what I want to know is, how do you enforce this law? I mean, is the onus on the child to go and report them? It's very, very hard, in my experience, to diagnose full-blown abuse cases. I mean, are you then going to put the pressure onto children that every time something happens in the home, they feel they've got to go to an adult and say, my mum smacked me today?
Yeah, this has got to be the worry, hasn't it?
In Sweden,
Yeah.
since the law was passed, there's been only one case where a parent made a report that in fact ended up in any kind of suit, and the fine was, I think, the equivalent of £9.
No, but just a minute. This is really, you are not conveying to us the full effect of the Swedish experiment. What happens to children in Sweden is that they're taken into care. They're taken
No, they're
away
not.
From...
There has
Yes,
been a
they
reduction
are.
in
They
care
are
from
indeed.
1980.
Just a second.
Swedish friend staying with us last week. It's a shame that she had to fly back yesterday. I think what you said is grossly insulting to the Swedish
Yes,
people. And you seem to be equating discipline with smacking. There are other forms of discipline
And how do you know
apart
that
from smacking.
One at a time. One at a
From
time.
1970 to 1979, there was a reduction of 2,000 children taken into care in Sweden.
All right,
Yes,
which
but look,
tends...
you can't equate them. 90% of women in Sweden put their children into creches and work full-time. As you know from all sorts of surveys conducted there, they don't particularly like it, but that's their system. They have no tax incentives, no help to stay at home and bring up their children.
But they don't do that until they've had 15 months at home.
Family legislation. And all this is very anti-family. The whole idea of having social
Hang on, we're slightly straying away from it. The argument, Mrs. Burrows, we're slightly straying away from it. The argument is whether there are not other ways of disciplining children rather than smacking
Well, that's
them.
part of the argument.
Of course
but if you actually make it...
All right, let's hear from your son then, since he's one who's experienced it.
It's part of the argument, but if you make it criminal for people to actually...
Just a minute,
making people's criminals at all.
No, but go on. Let me just finish let him finish the point
if
he was
you actually
making.
make it, if you bring the law into the basic relationship between a child and its parent, you bring this great, huge, bureaucratic, whatever system.
We are talking about a civil law, not a criminal law.
You're talking about civil law, but if you think, you know, I behave like this to my child, I am breaking the law. The child thinks he's breaking the law. It becomes vastly complicated. You have social workers. You have all these sort of people interfering who have nothing to do with that relationship.
All right, let me put that point, let me put that point to Peter Newell. Whether it's civil law, criminal law, whatever it is, you are bringing the law into the relationship between parents and children, which is odd, is it not?
We've brought the law into every other form of personal relationship. In every other area, we say that personal violence is not on, and we use language to indicate that we disapprove of it. If you go back far enough, you find that it was legal for husbands to give their wives the odd slap. No one now regards that as acceptable.
All right,
it
Sarah,
still happens.
do you think it's reasonable to bring the law into the relationship between parents and children?
Well, it is in the relationship anyway. Yes. And in schools, I mean, they talk about it's not enforceable. And
but the idea of children snitching on their parents is from 1984 a bit, isn't it?
But they haven't done it.
But it's a
in
matter
other countries.
of education. It's like lots of laws are unenforceable in lots of ways. For example,
the purpose is to establish a norm to help parents
it's
know.
education. It's education and changing people's attitudes. I mean, children used to go up chimneys 100 years ago or 200 years ago.
And it's not blaming parents at all. Parenting is difficult.
Yes, but it's not that difficult. It's made more difficult by you lot coming in.
The person who's really going to suffer is not going to be the articulate parents. It's going to be the parents who are not, who get abused. Like
all right, I'm going to stop you all because I want to give the children I hope you've all been listening to this debate. Put up your hands if you think there should be a law that says parents oughtn't to be able to smack their children. What do you think? Put your hands up if you think there should be a law that says parents should not smack their children. Well, there we are. So it's about 50-50 really, isn't it? Which is, I suspect, the way it's going to end the debate anyway. But the debate will live on. No, we've run out of time, I'm afraid, but the debate will live on and will continue in this country anyway. In next week's programme, we shall be talking to parents who have children later on in life, in middle age or even later perhaps, about the effect on their lives and the lives of their children. Until then, good night.